Lots of people that I've been around, like Seymour Papert, Walter Bender, Rich Resnick at the Media Lab, and he was at the Media Lab too, have thought hard and long about what do we do to get the literacy of the whole world up, and what technology does it take. And here we have Tinsley, who's done so many other things as well, as you can see on his bio, but he has spent the last decade building this company and this this tool that actually is contributed to by I don't know how many people, what, thousands or hundreds?
Yeah, I don't know that I could say.
Yeah, people writing on this platform educational material, and so I'm very excited about that, and we look forward to your talk and learning more about you. And so thank you. And one more thing, please use the chat if you want to ask questions. We will field your questions, maybe get you to speak up. And this microphone can be passed to anybody. And do you want people to hold their questions to the end or during the thing?
I'm fine with this becoming as much of a discussion as people want it to become. So I do have some prepared slides and speaking, but don't hesitate to pause me and ask a question if you want, and there'll be plenty of time afterwards to do extended discussion too. Okay.
Thank you.
So
with that, please take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. So as Ted said, my name is Tinsley Galyean, and I'm one of the co-founders of a global nonprofit called Curious Learning. So let me start with a little bit of a story here. So about in 2014, I found myself walking the ridge line of some mountains in Ethiopia at about 10,000 feet through the clouds to get to this village. Okay, so let me back up for a second, tell you how I ended up there. I did my PhD work at the Media Lab, as Ted alluded to, in the early 90s, and then worked in media and technology for a number of decades. And I got to a point where I was kind of shifting and changing what I was doing in my career, and got involved in starting the first nonprofit I was involved in, which was called the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values, which was affiliated with MIT. And that got me back on the campus. And I was asked to come back to the Media Lab and to help teach some courses and to be available to get involved in some research projects. And I ended up getting involved with a small group of researchers that were partly at the Media Lab and partly at Tufts University and Georgia State University that had asked a very simple question, which is, could you take a simple touchscreen device, and at this time it was a tablet, and could you put curated apps on it, and could kids learn to read by just playing with it? So an experiment was mounted, and 2 communities in rural Ethiopia were found. And we went into these 2 communities, and we placed in solar panels that could charge the tablets, and showed some folks in the village about how to keep them charged. And we gave every kid a tablet and didn't even tell them how to turn them on. Okay. And pretty much universally, within about 4 minutes, a kid would figure out how to turn it on and start sharing that knowledge with the rest of the kids in the community. Then they were left to their own accord to play with it. And we came back a year later and did a kind of assessment of where they were at. And much to our surprise, they were roughly at the same level as if they had been in a well-resourced kindergarten for a year. And that was kind of mind-blowing. So my co-founder, Stephanie Gottwald, who is a neuroscientist and linguist from Tufts University, had been studying how the brain learns to read for years. We pooled our resources and decided we wanted to put together a whole series of other kind of research sites and see if we could replicate this experiment. Was this a unique thing that happened only once? Was it tied to a particular culture or language or situation, or could this actually be more universally applied? And so we mounted a trip where we launched a whole series of these sites in a bunch of different countries throughout Africa and Asia, and even some in South America and one in the US. And we started seeing similar results from these other places. And this prompted us to found a nonprofit to kind of move forward with that. These are some of the kids using the tablets in one of the villages in Ethiopia. When we came into this village to check on these kids after they'd had it for a couple years, this young boy came running up the hill. And he's a really interesting story behind this boy. This boy his father had committed suicide some years earlier. And as a result, he was socially ostracized from the community. But he was the kid who figured out how to turn the tablet on within 4 minutes. And he was always the kid who was first figuring out how to use it and sharing that knowledge with others. So he became a leader very quickly. And the whole community started seeing him differently. And his whole relationship to the community changed as a byproduct of this access and this ability. And he started dreaming about what he would do when he grew up. He wanted to work with computers, and another girl wanted to be a doctor. And the dreams started kind of pouring out of these kids because of the opportunity that they were afforded from being able to start to learn to read. So Curious Learning was launched with a very simple mission, which was to give everyone the opportunity to learn to read. It's that simple. But specifically with the idea of leveraging what we believed was the impending growth of smartphones in the world. So this is 11 years ago. We made that bet. Turns out it was probably a pretty good one. So let me give you guys a little flavor of what it feels like today. Let me play you this video so you can see it in action. And this is a mom in Nairobi. Where's the audio?
I'm Susie.
There
I am
it is.
35 years old. Education for me is very important. I'll do everything for myself because I know at this age, this is where it starts like learning everything. And I believe education to make someone go far. Curious app, it benefits me as a mother because I can spend time with my kid. So it's like engaging with my son more than before. And for him, he has improved, like the language, the pronunciation, the attention he has, like he can listen to a whole story again and again. It makes him like being attentive and then learn how to read a sentence and construct a sentence. Pick your phone, go to where you download WhatsApp. On the top of the icon, search Curious Learning app, and then you'll get it there and then click on the download. The cartoons are nice and the kid like presses the letter and then it says amazing. It even motivates him.
Fantastic.
Amazing. So I've seen a very good improvement because he's a quick learner. He can even pronounce an elephant. It's even amazing for me. So I like it. When he's reading the sounds, I learn from the app too. Even if you want to run a business, you need education. I want to say go back to school next year and do data science or software engineering. That's my passion. This guy, when he went up country, he was talking to his grandfather. He was like, are you taking him to the international schools? I'm like, no, this is the app he's using. So even them, they're amazed he has a nice English. As a parent, I'm happier because he's learning, he's improving a lot.
So another example, we've had a long-standing research site in a very rural community of probably a 45-minute drive off of paved roads in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, near the Drakensberg Mountains. This community is a Zulu-speaking community, and South Africa is interesting, and like a lot of African countries, instruction is done in the local language until about grade 4, and then there's a switch to a global language. In South Africa, it's a switch to English. That's in great part because there's just not a lot of printed content in local languages. So once you start to get any higher level subjects, you kind of have to be in a global language where there's enough material that you can engage with. So in this particular community in South Africa, we worked with them for a number of years. In South Africa, the literacy rates is not as bad as other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, but bad. You know, it's 15 to 20% of the community is reading at grade level by grade 4 is all. And then they're kicked over to another language at grade 4. So after 4 years of this intervention, where tablets were used in the community center and now they're used in the schools there, that went from 20% to 100% of the kids in this community were reading at grade level in Zulu, and 50% of them were reading at grade level in English. Okay, so a big jump. The World Bank did a large-scale RCT with 3,000 homes in northern Nigeria. And in this particular case, these were communities that were more rural, and they actually handed out phones and gave them to the families to use in the homes. And they found that it was second, compared to other interventions, it was second only to one-on-one tutoring, right? And incredibly scalable compared to one-on-one tutoring, as you can imagine. The other thing that happens, they've just completed a follow-up study on the same population. And what you're looking, you know, literacy has this ability to change other aspects of communities, to give them access to other resources and other abilities. And so it starts to change cultural behavior sometimes. And in this particular case, there was an 18% reduction in teen parenthood and marriage. It's typical for girls to be married off at about 15 years old within these communities. And there's about a 14% reduction in underage labor. Okay? So how does this work? Well, one of our primary kind of distribution methods, as there's a growing base of smartphones in the world, is to create awareness campaigns where parents become aware of the app, and they download it, and then they make it available to their kids. That's what you saw with the mom in Nigeria, okay? And then they play it and use it. It's a fairly simple model. Using that model, we reached a million learners in 2024. We've reached another million in 2025 at an average cost of about 50 cents per household to get a phone activated and starting to be used with this material in the homes. We're operating currently in I think we have 60 languages in the field now, a couple more about ready to come out. Okay. To give you a sense of the size of the scale of the issue in the world, there's roughly 770 million adults in the world who effectively have no literacy skills at all, like almost nothing. They're concentrated, 75% of them are concentrated in about 10 countries. The primary regions are Sub-Saharan Africa and India and a few surrounding countries. And it's estimated that this illiteracy in the world costs the global GDP about $1.2 trillion a year. Okay, so that's the potential impact it has if we can help a generation become literate. And we've already kind of seen that literacy can have a lot of other effects on other aspects. Pretty much anything that folks working in development want to affect and change can be indirectly affected and helped by bringing a population into literacy. Not only is there those 770 million adults that are currently don't have any literacy skills, the world's about ready to go through a population explosion, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa. By 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet are going to be African. Okay? And in Sub-Saharan Africa, there's only a 10% of the population is reading at grade level by grade 4. So effectively, and India is still continuing to grow, not as quickly. So if you project that forward, you're looking over the next 25 years of us adding 1 billion people with inadequate literacy skills to the planet. And these are communities where school systems are already failing 90% of the population, and you're going to ask them to try to improve what they're doing and double their capacity during the next 25 years, I think that's too much to ask of the existing system. So if we at Curious Learning only exist long enough to help some percentage of those kids from falling in the trap of not becoming literate because there's not adequate resources, then it will have been worth doing. So what's the opportunity? Well, in 2023, the estimate from what we could see is that about 60% of adults had smartphones already in Africa and India. That number's closer to 80% already. And so we're looking at kind of saturation of the market relatively quickly. Right, so how can we leverage these devices that are already out there in a way that can actually make meaningful difference?
Question?
Yeah.
Two questions. If we have a literacy and we have a cell phone, how do we learn by just having a cell phone, or how do we get by with illiteracy when we have a cell phone?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, right? Because a lot of the parents who have the smartphones are very questionably literate themselves, right? And I don't know that we have all the answers. There's certainly what you're seeing in a lot of countries is there are apps that are now being used for people to hire day laborers, and so people who are living on $2 a day are finding that they can use apps to better find work or get in touch. I was in an informal settlement, or what some people would refer to as a slum in northern India, and in Nasik some years ago, and I was walking down the typical structures of the corrugated metal and over an open sewer into someone's home who invited me in, and I was talking to him about what he did for a living, and he was explaining to me that he made turbans for people for their weddings, and to illustrate what he did for me, he pulled a smartphone out of his pocket to show me pictures of what he did. And he was using his smartphone to take pictures of his work and send them to his customers and sending voice messages back and forth. All right, so there's certainly a lot of creativity about how to utilize the device in a way that doesn't require, it's a limited use compared to what we would think of, but you see that kind of creativity happening all the time because it opens up so many doors to access to work and income. So.
That's a fabulous example. The other question is that 1.1 trillion, is that all that they would be producing more stuff, or it's the friction caused by them not being able to communicate themselves, or is it, it's all of the above probably?
Well, it's a good question. It's a World Bank measure, and I have a kind of educated guess at how they came to that number. I'd have to go back and look at the research papers to get to it in detail. But what we do know is that even small amounts of literacy radically increase your earning power. So what they're looking at is as your earning power increases with your literacy skills, you're adding more to the GDP of the countries.
So I expect that that's actually undervaluing the cost of people not being illiterate.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's just an economic contribution on their part. That's not the cost of whatever else you're doing to deal with populations, all the friction of living, being illiterate. It doesn't account for any of that. Exactly. Yeah. So we've hit on some of this already, so I won't dwell on it. But I will. What I will say is that we've reached a point in history where I believe we reached a point in history where the ability and access to learn to read should be considered and is considered a human right. Right? That it's as important to us today as food, clothing, shelter. Maybe one rung above those, but it's pretty much should be thought of as a human right at this point in time in history. So, another question?
Yeah, hi, this is Natalie Friedman. I saw that you said it's about 50 cents per household.
Yes.
Is that like you were able to get tablets at scale, or how is
That's
that possible?
activating phones that are already in the households.
okay.
So that's the cost of running the awareness campaigns to get them to use it. So our work is unusual in that it's a platform, and it's a set of content that we've curated and localized, and many different people contribute to it over time, and it's all open source and Creative Commons and freely available. So it gets picked up and used in different ways of delivering it. But, and so in some cases, like the World Bank project of putting on devices and handing them out, schools or community centers putting on devices they buy and having kids come and use them there and then leave them. That's what happened in Hulixburg and KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. But when we start looking at how do we scale, right? How do we help the 1 billion people that are not going to learn to read if we don't do something over the next 25 years? Part of our interest is trying to figure out how we leverage the fact that 98% of those households are going to have a smartphone in them if they don't already have it. And how do we take advantage of that? Because that's the most frictionless path to making it happen. Right.
Thank you.
So that's the way we think about it.
Can I ask one follow-up?
Yeah.
Did you notice a difference in use when you would give people phones, like in that 1-year study or 2-year study, versus if they already had them and then they were using that?
Absolutely. It's definitely, but what we do know is that when kids have unfeathered access to the device, the learning is incredibly steep. And I'll talk about why we think that's true a little later in my talk. I actually have some slides to speak to that and to think about that. What we still are trying to figure out is that when we get a parent to activate their device and give it to kids, sometimes it takes off and sometimes it doesn't. And what we don't quite understand is when it doesn't is what's inhibiting it. Right? Is it that the parent has the smartphone with them, they're not getting home late at night, and it's not getting as available to the kids? Or, what's the dynamic that's stopping that from taking off sometimes, and other times it does take off, right? And we're about ready to launch some studies and pilots where we kind of dig into that more deeply. What we do know is that when kids have unfettered access to the content, that we have finally figured out what the experience needs to be that captivates kids and kids learn. So we've got that piece figured out. Now we've got the social dynamic we have to deal with, right? And I'll speak a little bit to that. And it's not just at the parent level; it's actually at societal levels too. So, okay. Yeah, okay. So literacy is a big lever for change. Okay, so you were just asking, why do we see such steep learning curves? And one of the things that we've come to understand and believe is that there's a real interesting connection between the notion of curiosity and learning. There's actually some really interesting neuroscience papers about this, where if you self-report that you're in a curious state of mind, it actually is activating your brain chemistry to have you ready to myelinate the new information that comes in and build the neural pathways to capture that information. No kind of surprise, right? When we learn the things quickest that we were most curious about. But what's really surprising is that once you're in a curious state of mind, it doesn't matter what you see next, you learn it faster. You don't have to be curious about what you learn faster. You just have to be in a curious state of mind and be given something to learn because your brain chemistry is there and ready for it. So part of what we have at some level inadvertently, and then once we understood what was happening, tried to amplify in the way that we present the information and make it available to kids and the way the games and activities work, is that we try to activate their curiosity. And once they're in that curious mindset, we sandbox them into activities that help them learn to read. So how do we do that? We do that by creating apps that cultivate curiosity, relaxing the constraints so that we're not stepping them through a learning process. A lot of the convention is the idea that the fastest way to make somebody learn is to pick the optimal path and lead them through it. But that doesn't make you curious. That takes you out of a curious mindset, right? So how do you relax the path enough to where their own agency is picking the path? They're curious about what they're doing, but then they're getting information that's exciting. So that, we feel like, has been one of the things that we've unearthed. Now, the other part of the talk that I wanted to talk about, which hits on some of the other things that came up in some of the questions, is what's holding us back from this just being something that can change the face of the planet tomorrow, right? And this actually goes to, I just recently published a book, which I brought a copy of if folks want to take a look at it after the talk. And one of the things I've identified in this book is this notion that beliefs can become limiting. You know, they're often referred to as limiting beliefs in this context. And what I mean is that we all have beliefs about things, and those beliefs are valuable to us. They help us make judgments about what we're going to do, what we're going to interact with, and how we're going to engage with the world. But sometimes those beliefs become entrenched to the point where we're dismissive of opportunities to achieve what we most want to achieve in the world. Okay, and at that point in time, they become limiting, right? And what do I mean by limiting beliefs? Well, the definition I have here is that they're thoughts, societal conditioning, institutional narratives that reside in our minds and obscure our vision of what is possible. Okay, we get stuck, we get stagnated because of it. And this happens at all levels. It happens at the level of individuals, happens at societal level, governmental levels, and a global level. And I'll go through some examples of each of those. And one of the things I thought I'd focus on for this group that was interesting is that the idea of when you encounter these limiting beliefs is how can we utilize the user experience that we're trying to create to try to knock people out of those limiting beliefs, right? And to overcome them at all those levels. So first of all, how do we identify these beliefs? And what we've discovered over the years of talking to ministries of education or schools or teachers or parents is that more often than not, you end up in a conversation, everybody here can probably say they've experienced this, where you feel like you reach a conversational dead end, that somebody says something that kind of shuts the conversation down, right? And it's like strong and dismissive, and you're can be put off by it, or you can feel like the conversation is over and it's not going anywhere else, right? And what we've tried to train ourselves to do is that when that happens, is to not turn away and shut down and shut off, but to open up our own curiosity about what's really going on there. And to start mining by asking lots of questions without judgment about what's going on there. Questions like the ones I outline here. Could you tell me more about what you were just thinking, right? It sounds like there's something some experience you've had that could inform this conversation or that you're bringing to this conversation. Can you help me understand what that is? And it's only through that kind of open dialogue that you can actually get to the point where you can articulate what the belief is that's behind the action or the shutting down of that conversation. And then there's a dialogue to say, is that belief something that's still valuable? Does it still hold value in where we want to be and where we want to get to? Or is there a need to rethink it? Okay, so let's go through, so in essence, it's another application of curiosity. And you'll see that that's a theme. It's a theme in the book, that's a theme throughout the talk, is curiosity becomes kind of the anecdote for a lot of these situations. So let's look at a limiting belief on the individual level. And this goes into some of the questions you were asking, which is that it's for parents that have limited literacy skills, they often can hold a belief that they really can't help their kid learn, right? Or they might go so far as to say, it's not my job to help them learn, it's the school's job, right? And yet, we know from all the research that the kids that succeed best in school are the parents who are involved in their education, encouraging it and supporting it, right? So how do we start to shift that, right? And one of the things we've done in the interface is we've tried to make the interface very discoverable, which means a kid on their own who has no experience of playing or interacting with these devices or any literacy skills can just play around and figure it out. But that has the added benefit that a parent can do that too, or can observe their kid doing that, right? And so there's no kind of preset, pre-knowledge you have to actually engage in the learning experience. They can allow the child to lead. They can be excited about seeing how the child has achieved that. And then there's things like the storybooks that we have on the device are in an interactive format that allows them to read aloud to you and highlight the words as they're being said. And there's a whole series of interactions that we've refined over the years that we know helps the literacy learning journey. But they also allows a parent to sit with a kid without them being forced to feel like they have to be the one reading the book. So they can be there interacting, engaging, encouraging, and part of the child's learning process without being put on the spot to demonstrate that they don't have adequate literacy skills. So it starts to break down that limiting belief. Yeah.
So Ted again. I know that there's sometimes jealousy of parents when children move ahead of where they are at. Mm-hmm. And I just hear a little sense of that in this story, and I just wonder how you experience that, counter that, or avoid it. Or
what's interesting is that we don't. Most parents know that education and literacy is going to be helpful to their kids, and they want their kids to live a life that's better and has more opportunity themselves. That's pretty universal. It actually, in a surprising way, the only time that I feel like we've overtly run into that was in the U.S., believe it or not. And it was in a situation where in rural Georgia or Alabama, I'm not remembering which one right now, there were small towns where what was happening is kids grew up and became better educated, that they were leaving. And the literacy rates were pretty low in those communities, and we started working in some of those communities in our early days. And we got resistance from parents because they were scared their kids were going to learn enough to where they would leave their parents. And so it became, that was the only time I've run into it, to be honest. It's not to say it's not in other parts of the world. It's not part of the norm. It's the exception in my experience. So,
welcome to Q.
So, okay. So I was going to play a short video for you here. This is an example of a video that kind of speaks to the parent and helps them understand how they can better use the app with their kids.
To Curious Learning. The app includes stories and games that will help your child become a great reader. Even just 10 minutes of playing the game, Feed the Monster, will help your child to learn. Encourage your child to play at least 3 times a week, or even better, every day. To help your child become even more excited about reading, you can also listen to stories as often as you'd like. Encourage them to play on their own and alongside you. With your help and curious learning, your child will quickly become an amazing reader.
So that gives you a flavor of how we try to speak to the parents. Okay, so this is an example of a kind of what I would refer to as a societal level limiting belief. In the communities we were working in northern Nigeria with the World Bank, it is the norm in those communities that girls are married at about 15 years old. And without an alternative that seems to hold, and parents feel like that's the best option for them, and the girls actually feel the same way. It's the best option for them. So part of what happened in that space is it not only was were our apps available to them, but there were also aspirational stories that were embedded in the apps and actually shown to the parents ahead of time. So this is an example of one of those aspirational stories.
Let us meet Fatima from Nigeria to see how she was able to achieve well-being.
My name is Fatima. I am a pilot. I am the first female pilot from my home state, Kano State. It has always been my dream. I always wanted to be a pilot. I have a passion for it. I always wanted to be in the cockpit, handling the controls myself, making this huge machine do what I wanted to do. Flying an airplane with a lot of passengers whom I have entrusted their lives upon my bare hand is the most satisfying and fulfilling feeling. When I was in secondary school, I used to like geography a lot, and it helped me a lot during my flight training. Back then in flight school, I was the only female out of over 100 students. I was constantly ridiculed by those who felt a woman doesn't belong in a flight school. Honestly, for someone to succeed, you need to be hardworking, you need to be willing to commit and dedicate beyond expectation, push beyond all limits, and you must be willing to bypass circumstances. Men and women are equal. The aircraft itself doesn't recognize gender. It's just a matter of actions imposed by the pilot and responses returned by the aircraft. To the young girls out there, got a dream, believe in yourself and chase it down. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do it.
So that's an example of an aspirational story of somebody from their community achieving something that they didn't think was possible. And that opens their eyes to thinking about what's possible. But what's interesting is the groups who saw these aspirational videos but didn't have the apps, because there was a RCT where we were comparing groups, they didn't change their social behavior, right? But when they had the apps and actually had a way to act on it and actually start to change what their kids could learn and do, it started to change things. And kids started to dream about what they could do, and the behavior started changing. So it's the combination of the two that's important. It's not just the stories. It's the ability to act upon what you aspire to from having seen the story. So, another set of limiting beliefs that we often run into are more at the governmental level, like with ministries of education. And two examples of that I talk about in the book in detail are, one, this notion of no child left behind. And the other one is this idea that all learning needs to be curriculum aligned. So let me talk about those and see how those get perverted. And so with No Child Left Behind, there's this kind of feeling that it starts off from a good place, right? We want to make sure every child has the opportunity to learn, right? And then what starts to happen at the government level is that you come in with a particular intervention or idea, and they say, yes, but that won't work for parents that don't already have a smartphone. Or yes, that won't work. And they start dismissing things that can't work for everybody, and it gets perverted into, it has to be one solution that works for everybody. And we've hit up against that a lot, right? It's the analogy I started using before the pandemic was, if you had a population and you think of illiteracy as a disease and that you had a cure for it, right? You wouldn't go and say, hey, what we're going to do is start with the people that are the hardest to reach, and we got to give them the vaccine first before we give it to anybody else, right? You give it to whoever you can get to first, and then you keep working to get it to everybody, right? But that gets lost in this sense of needing to keep everything balanced, needing everybody to have the same thing, and not willing to act until you have something that works for everybody and you know how it's going to work for everybody. So No Child Left Behind becomes All Children Left Behind, right? Another example is that school systems become very married to a curriculum that they've defined. And this is anchored in the kind of traditional way curriculums have been developed over the years and the inability for them to move or change, right? The traditional system is that, a committee does their best guess at what would make a great curriculum for teaching something. That gets instantiated into a textbook, it gets published, it gets pushed out there, and there's no way you're going to think about changing it for a couple decades because it would be too burdensome and expensive to do that. And so you don't even bother testing whether it's really working because there's nothing you can do about it anyhow. And so, and we're now in an era where we can deliver educational experiences and get feedback from them instantly and adjust them and change them rapidly. Right? But the thinking hasn't changed. The thinking is that the curriculum has to be locked in. Right? Even when that curriculum is not servicing the goals you want. And so how do we go about changing that? What are the ways that we can kind of circumvent that? Well, by going directly to parents, we don't have to convince school systems. Right? As a matter of fact, one of the things we've started doing is that when we know we're going to have a meeting with the Ministry of Education, we will actually push it off for a few weeks, and we will run social media ads in and around the communities where all the people who work at that Ministry of Education live. And we get as many kids to download it and use it as possible for a couple weeks before we meet with them. And inevitably, some percentage of those people in the meeting are kids who have started using the app or whose grandkids have started using the app. And the conversation starts off very differently. Right? So, let's see what I say. So, in this case, you create curiosity about the novelty of something new that engages them. This is at a global level. I'm going to use an example of another type of kind of way that limiting beliefs reveal themselves. And that's with the idea that you're holding two beliefs that are in conflict with each other, but you're unwilling to see the conflict between them or to look at it. And the example I'll use in this case is that we have historically built an educational system that is gated. You inherently have to get to a certain level, you have to apply, you have to get in, right? You have to achieve something before you move on to the next level, right? That's how the system was built. And for good reason. It was a limited resource, and we were trying to decide what percentage of the population was going to get access to it, right? We've now reached a point in time in history where the UN has stated with SDG 4 that we want to ensure that everybody has equitable access to lifetime learning. Those are incompatible. You want to give everybody access to learning, but you want to gate the access to the educational experience. That's baked into our society right now, and we're not looking at it. So what do we need? We need new ways to deliver learning. And that's starting to happen. I mean, all of us have wanted to learn new skills and have used our access to material on the internet to do that, right? There's the beginning of that starting to happen, but we haven't made the cultural shift of realizing that's part of education, right? And that we have to unwrap our traditional thinking about what education means. I'll leave you with this last thought, which is, it is very rare for a literate parent to raise an illiterate child. They have some skills to help them learn, and they know the value of it, and they want to do everything they can to make sure their kid gets access to it, right? So what's this mean? This means that if we could get an entire generation of kids literate, we could be done. We could inoculate the planet against illiteracy indefinitely. And that was such a powerful idea for us when we were starting Curious Learning that we actually wrote into our charter that every few years our board has to look at it and say, have we catalyzed enough other people to carry this mission forward? Have we reached a big enough threshold to where we should shut down? And as a nonprofit, our goal is to shut ourselves down, is to get to the point where we are not needed anymore. So, thank you. Let's move on to more questions. Okay.
Provocative, exciting, informative, great stuff. And I'm thinking, as the last statements you were making, I'm starting to think about libraries and what a transformation having free libraries was probably 100 years ago. And I don't know whether there was as many signs around before libraries or what, the literacy situation was in our country and other first world countries, but it's a little bit like that maybe, that we're opening up a tool that has that kind of
access to education, right? I mean, it's definitely, I'm not going to get all the facts right. Somebody in the audience might know these better than me, but some of the founding fathers of our country, Ben Franklin in particular, were huge advocates of libraries. And part of that was the idea that not only
he was a publisher.
Right, before that was publishers, right. But also, part of that was a recognition on a couple different levels, right? One is that is the value of it to us as humans. The other was the value to us as a democracy, right?
Whatever that is.
Yeah, but I'll tell you examples. I have literally been in conversations with ministries of education where we're talking to them about what we want to do in their country and letting them know how we're going to promote these apps, and they're saying this is all great, but we don't want you to do it in the north where the rebels are, because we don't want them educated, because we can't control them then.
Yeah.
Right. So that is
a reputation that some of the African countries have of not investing in roads because that'll let people, be rebels and stuff.
So it's an empowerment tool for the individual. It's also an empowerment tool for the society.
Right.
Right. And for those of us who believe in wanting to promote democracy, it's a powerful way to help make that happen. Yeah. Right, and to fight autocracy, right?
So another question that I wanted to get to, which is very different, is I've looked at some of your material, and the question of how do we monitor and encourage high quality educational material on a platform that is open like this.
Well, we have three primary focuses within our organization. One is content development, right? The other is distribution, which were what are the best strategies and most economic and cost-effective strategies for getting in the hands of kids, getting to use it. And the third is measurement, right? And measurement happens at a couple different levels. We collect a lot of data about usage. We do that completely anonymously. We feel like we can learn enough without having to know the individuals, so everything's done anonymously. And that has a benefit that data we can freely share it with anybody, any researchers, anybody who wants to look at it and evaluate and scrutinize it. So it becomes, we're moving towards an open data model in that respect, right? Not just. The other thing that we've been developing with partners is a set of activities that assess certain literacy skills. So they're games and activities that function as assessments. So we can periodically steer the kids towards playing one of those and get data points of where they're at in their learning, which may at some point be used for even more personalized learning experiences. but also gives us kind of pre and post data before and after they look at, or play with different activities. So if we have a pool of activities, we can introduce new ones that we think are going to work. We can do pre and post assessments on the skill we think it's most going to impact,
Sure.
and we can look at whether it works over time.
So I want to pass this out to other people, but I have one more question, which is, these are some talented designers you have here, actually. And how should they either engage or encourage other people to engage with your organization?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think the most obvious design, when you think about if people are particularly interested in designing the user experience, the most obvious thing is in the context of the user experience. Our platform is basically a collection of mini games and activities. And we are always open to putting new ones on there. And the ability to create new ones rapidly and quickly and prototype them and getting them out there, AI is accelerating the ability to think about how to do that. So we're on the verge of looking at ways that partners and people who are even lay people who don't have coding skills could actually help create content that we can then push into the field and test its effectiveness and see, how engaging it is and how it works. So that's certainly one space that would be fun for anybody who enjoys that kind of work could dive into and help with. So much so that we've been toying around with this idea of running the equivalent of hackathons, for local people in remote countries who don't know how to code, but could use. Could we actually equip them with some AI coding tools where they can give instructions to and try to get culturally relevant, appropriate content out that we can test, right? Which is an interesting idea too. So there's a lot to play with in that space. I see another question.
Hey, it's Natalie again. I'm curious how you choose the languages that go on the app.
Okay. So I'll start with the statement that it's pretty clear from all the science that it's best to learn to read in the language you speak, right? Which makes sense when you think about it. If you don't have the oral vocabulary, it's very hard to really learn to read the language. And then once you know how to read your mother tongue, you can use that as a stepping stone to help yourself learn in a second language, often a global language. So our focus becomes on where are there large pockets of communities where there's a mother tongue spoken, where there's need, okay? And then we balance that by where have smartphone penetration taken off faster, and maybe we should start there, right? So we don't think 60 languages is the end, it's just the start. So it's somewhat opportunistic and somewhat focused on need. It's a balance of the two.
More questions, but I want to let other people.
No, go for it.
Okay. You've been it sounds like you've been to so many places.
Yes.
I imagine that you go to places where you don't know the language at all.
Most of them, yeah.
Okay, so do you have some tips for us when going to a place where people don't know the language? Like, how do you navigate that?
Well, you've already got a huge advantage because you're an English speaker, right? Which, for better or worse, is if you're only going to speak one language, that's the one you want to speak if you're traveling globally, More and more, I do from time to time use, translation skills, apps in my, on my phone from time to time. The reality is that, almost everywhere you go, if you're really curious and engaging and talking to, working and trying to work and communicate with people, people want to connect with you, right? And it takes a little more effort and a little more time, but you usually, through doing a lot of silly things, you can get somewhere, right? And so I've very rarely been in a situation where anybody didn't want to try. And so I would just encourage you to do that, right? And let down any inhibition you have to just try and talk and use whatever language comes up and what's there. So
That gives me hope. Thank you.
Hey, I just had a question about, I feel like there was several waves of like educational software. So we see that early in like the, even the DOS days, like, Reader Rabbit and all these educational games. And then we saw kind of the rise of these, educational devices like Leapster and those type of devices. And now that we've seen everything sort of condensed down to the, the phone form factor, it seems like there's sort of this reputation of like, they will say more derisively like an iPad baby, right? Somebody who the parent just kind of gave the device to the child and let them watch auto-playing videos or just video content exclusively. I'm curious what you think about like the current state of like educational software like as a whole, and like where you see your platform in that like current world of educational software.
Yeah, and I'll answer your question, but hidden under that question is this this fear and belief that screen time is bad for kids, right? So that's there's an undercurrent in what you're saying that's there too, which I'll come back to. When smartphones came out, I was at the Media Lab at a time when you weren't doing research work unless it was something that couldn't get to market for 10 years, right? That was kind of our mantra, right? We were looking at stuff that was at least a decade out. By the time I got back there and was teaching in the research place, the mindset had changed, right? All of a sudden, there was this device that most people had in their pocket that we hadn't figured out how to use, right? We're still figuring out how to use it. How do we, not just what we can do with it, but what do we want to do with it, right? And I think that's absolutely true from an educational perspective too, right? Is that there's been a lot of effort to try to figure that out. When we started, that open question of, could somebody even learn to read using it was an unknown. It was a complete unknown, right? And our first experiments proved to us that it could, enough to inspire the Global Learning X Prize, which was inspired from our research work, right? And we were consultants on that and judges on it, and then that spawned a whole set of industry that's been working in this space. And some of that stuff is working well, and some of it's not. Some of it works under certain conditions and not others. We're still learning, right? And as I said, from a literacy perspective, the problem is so daunting and so big, there's not going to be any one solution. It's going to be some incredible patchwork of solutions that help the next billion kids learn to read, right? So all of those things you mentioned were stepping stones on the path towards what we know today and what we're doing. In some ways, we're maybe a little more constrained because we're trying to do it on a device that's already out there, and we have to live with what can be done on that device, right? We can't invent a new device or a combo book computer system that does something tangible. But there's a huge upside to figuring that out because that device is so pervasive, right? Okay.
One of the things that caught my attention as you're going through like how the children are learning is that they can listen to stories as part of the experience. And I wonder, as you also later mentioned about getting more content in the right language, I was struck with the notion that you would probably have like people out in the communities sort of collecting community stories,
Yep.
traditional stories, whatever, someone writing them down so that you could then sort of like programmatically somehow through a program to put into your app. Is that part of what you guys are doing, I imagine?
Well, there are several repositories that we weren't part of creating of open source stories that are out there that have come from many different parts of the world and communities, and we pull from those and use those. And in some cases, those are storybooks that are just PDFs and blank pages, and sometimes we borrow those stories and we make them interactive, right? We add the interactive aspect to them because we know there's certain types of interactivity that enhance the learning experience with that text. And there is, we have a partner out of Norway actually called the Global Digital Library that has been creating a new version of the player of these interactive books, and with it a new authoring tool. And part of what they're doing with that authoring tool is actually embedding certain AI tools within that authoring tool. So now a layperson can tell the story that's from their village or from their community and ask for illustrations to go with it in a particular style and give instructions until they like them and marry it up and go through the process of creating a book without having to have any coding experience or illustration ability or even voiceover talent, right? And so we're getting there, right? We're getting there from. Now, our QA process in these 60 languages, we have anywhere from 3 to 5 native speakers for each language that we work with. So we have somewhere around 250 or 300 subcontractors that we use that are native speakers who are part of the process. And we couldn't have done that without Fiverr and Upwork, to be honest. We're using the gig economy as a way of doing it.
So right? A related question, I think it would be more concrete if you could maybe, I don't know if you can easily, show us an exemplar and take us through it for a moment to get us a feeling of what this content looks like that in a more detailed way, maybe.
In a more detailed way? I don't know that I have it. I should have thought of that, had an easier way to do it. I wonder if in the video, there's a few images here that I can kind of point to and talk about it, which is, in essence, the way the content works right now is that you have a home screen, like you see with this boy on the right, and there's a series of icons. It's just like a launcher, but a kid-friendly launcher, right, of content. And one of our kind of premier apps is one we call Feed the Monster, okay? And the way that game works, which I think you saw in some of the videos, is that there's a creature that, we call it a friendly monster. Sometimes that gets translated to something different in other languages. You have to pick letters that you feed it to help it grow. But it asks for it makes a sound, or it asks for a letter that makes a certain sound, and if you don't give it the right letter, it spits it out, and if you give it the right one, it eats it up and feels good about it and it starts growing. So you go through the process of being led through the process of learning what the letter sound correspondence is and then being tested that you can recall it and apply it, right? And then that goes all the way up to syllables and then words in that activity, in that game. And so that's an anchor activity that's in there. And then the other is a set of interactive books. Not every language has interactive books yet. We're in the process of adding those. But for many languages that do, start off with like a dozen of them. And what we found in that interaction, I don't know if I have pictures of that. There was probably some of it in one of the videos. I can go back and play that video again in a minute. Is that it's like a traditional children's book in that there's an illustration on the screen and that the text is placed somewhere on the page. The text is read to you, but each word is highlighted as it's said. So you're making the visual correspondence between the word and the sound.
Kind of like the bouncing ball.
Like the bouncing ball, but it's actually it's a highlight on the text. And you can go back once, when it's read, you can go back and touch any word and it will say that word and highlight it. And for any word that has something in the image that corresponds to it, if it's a noun and it says ball and there's a ball in the picture, it highlights that object at the same time that it highlights the word and says the word, right? If it's a verb that's illustrated, then it highlights that. If it's a name of a character, it highlights the character. So that there's this visual correspondence between those things, right? So it's reinforcing the vocabulary, the word that goes with it, the sound that goes with the written text, and those are reinforced every time you see those things. And so those are the pieces that we've discovered over the years that have the largest and deepest learning impact.
That kind of stuff, showing us that stuff, of course, is what's going to make it concrete.
Right.
So Jim has a...
Hey, it's Jim. So games and drills, one thing, very isolated activity you can repeat. They're very content neutral, I would say. Feeding the monster is a sort of friendly blob, and we feed him. Every story, though, comes with some context, maybe cultural.
Yep.
It may teach, every story at least demonstrates values, if not trying to teach them or even impose them. I think about watching some little kids I know who have the sort of the bad screen time.
Yep.
They're just force feeding themselves YouTube videos that are not videos I would wish they were watching. And
Yep.
I wonder, it seems like you vet the content, you gate the content for your tools. Do you run into situations where you have to think about, is this content, can we actually deliver this to kids? I also was reflecting on growing up as a kid in Ohio where I was taught sort of super patriotic stuff.
Right.
And I kind of grew out of it.
Yeah.
Began to consider like, wow, maybe those things they taught me about Russia being all evil were not correct. And so these were like innocent things that people tell you. How do you address the sort of content question about what goes in your app? And I would imagine as you're going around the world, there are going to be people who don't want certain messages to be in there, and others who want things in there that you would prefer not.
Right. Well, those, what you're referring to is that, different people have different worldviews, right? And as a result of having different worldviews, you find certain things, that you don't agree with, and certain things they're fine with, right? And that happens everywhere. We do what we can for the basic literacy skill learning stuff like the Feed the Monster to keep it as culturally neutral as possible, right? One of the reasons that we didn't actually create the Feed the Monster app originally. That came out of a contest that we collaborated on the kind of rules and guidelines around to produce a app to help Syrian refugee kids learn to read, and it was first done in Arabic. And one of the criteria of that contest was that it be open source and Creative Commons and available. And we recognized this app coming out of there that it was pretty culturally neutral, and it was highly adaptable to other languages, right? And so we actually picked it up and started running with it. So, and we do have on our website, there's a whole kind of set of guidelines about what we've learned are the best practices for creating an interface and an app around literacy learning that is as culturally neutral as you can possibly make it. That doesn't mean you don't fail, right? We had a book that was a lovely children's book that we thought would be fine everywhere, and it had a main character was an owl. And there's certain communities in Africa where an owl is a harbinger of death and evil. And we just don't use it in those languages. It's just not available in those because it just doesn't work. It doesn't play, right? So, our kind of approach is, we try to create a big growing library and be sensitive about what's available to what communities and what languages.
So we've been asking lots of questions. If there's one last, maybe, but I think at this point, I'm hopeful that you can splash up your URLs and where to get more information and get people interested in trying out your tools.
Yes.
And thinking about them and thinking about how they can contribute, or if they can't, if there are people that they should make sure know about this system. And it's just a very exciting goal you have, very exciting work you've been doing, incredibly impactful, and I think that the presentation is quite inspiring. So thank you very much for that.
I'll rattle off some resources so
That's
folks
what I'd
have
like
it.
to, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So curiouslearning.org is our website. Go there. There's a lot of things hanging off of it.
Curiouslearning.org.
Yep. There's a web form there that you can actually contact us through that. My email address is tgalyean or Tinsley at curiouslearning.org, so you can reach me directly.
Tinsley at
curiouslearning.org.
Okay.
Right. You can reach me through that. If you want to know more about the story and the history and what we've done with limiting beliefs, I don't know what camera we're looking at.
No. Hold it up and keep it hold up. So that's a book you've written.
The book that I recently published called Reframe, How Curiosity and Literacy Can Redefine Us. Okay, it's available in Amazon and other places. Okay.
Is that what the publisher is?
Publisher is Business Expert Press. Okay.
All right.
All right, so that's another. The app itself, which you can find indirectly through our website, you can find the Play Store. If you search Curious Learning.
Curious Learning.
Yeah, or Curious Reader.
Curious Reader.
You can download the app. If you look for the face of the monster that you saw in the videos, you'll find it right away.
Monster, we got to play with the monster.
Yep.
Got to feed the monster.
It's I will say that do be aware that it's an Android app. It's in the Play Store. We do not have an iOS version. Okay? So sorry for folks who are only on iOS, but 99% of the population we're trying to reach is on Android phones. So that's our focus. Sorry.
Well, React Native does both, but that's that'd be a lift.
Yeah.
Well, this is all great information. Is there anything last examples of things that we haven't thought of to ask, or things that you want us to know about, or ways we can help you?
Well, the two big things that are, I'm always happy with this community to think about. This is a community that's going to get excited about what the user experience is like and how they can get engaged with it and do that. And so I would welcome those conversations, those engagements in ways that if folks wanted to get involved in helping, figure out how we could test new types of contents or experience for the kids on our platform, that's great. Be happy with those conversations. From an organizational standpoint, there's two things that are a priority for us right now. More visibility for us as an organization. So if anybody has ways of helping us get in front of more people so they know about the mission and know what's happening, right? Then let me know. I'd welcome that. And with that, access to people who would get excited about the financial support that we need to go from reaching $1 million a year to reaching $10 million a year.
Yeah, and how much financial support is that?
We're currently a $2 million a year operation, reaching 1 million kids a year. We're trying to get to a $7 to $8 million a year operation that's reaching 10 million kids a year.
Okay, sounds pretty efficient.
So it's highly efficient, but that's a big budget jump that we have to figure out how we fill.
All right.
Okay.
Well, maybe it's a gala that we'll all come to. I don't know.
Okay. All right.
All right. Well, that's fabulous. I hope everybody took notes on all those things, those lists of things that we can do to get involved. And with that, I want to thank you so much for coming to BayCHI and sharing this with us.
Thank you, guys.
And